I still remember the way the morning light used to catch Susan's hair in our first home together. Golden hour came soft through the kitchen curtains, painting everything in that warm glow that makes even ordinary moments feel sacred. She'd stand at the counter in her faded blue robe, humming some old folk song while the coffee percolated. That's the memory I keep coming back to, those quiet mornings when the world felt small and safe, just the two of us. We'd been married 6 months that spring, not long in the grand scheme of things, but long enough to settle into a rhythm that felt like coming home. Susan left little notes in my lunchbox. I warmed her car on frosty mornings. She laughed at all my jokes, even the bad ones, especially the bad ones. Then the phone would ring. David, Mom's voice would chirp through the receiver, all sweetness with that undercurrent I'd learned to recognize. You're still coming for Sunday supper, aren't you? I'm making your favorite pot roast. I can still feel Susan's eyes on me as I held that phone, see the way her shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly. Last visit, Mom had accidentally served the green beans Susan was allergic to. The time before that, she'd misplaced the family photo album when Susan asked to see my childhood pictures. Actually, Mom, I started, my throat suddenly dry, we were thinking maybe just a quiet weekend at home this time. The silence on the line was deafening. Then came the sigh, that wounded, trembling sigh I'd heard since childhood. Well, I suppose if you're too busy for your own mother now that you're married. Susan mouthed, "It's okay," from across the room, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. Sunday found us at my parents' dining table anyway. The pot roast was perfect, of course. Mom made sure to mention she'd used Grandma's recipe, the one Susan had asked for last Christmas and never received. Susan, dear, Mom said, passing the salt shaker with a too bright smile, you really should let David carve the meat. A man likes to feel needed in his own home. I saw Susan's knuckles whiten around her fork. My chest tightened with that familiar ache, the one that came whenever I had to choose between keeping the peace at home and standing up for my wife. The ride back was quiet until Susan spoke, her voice carefully even. You know she does this every time, right? I gripped the steering wheel tighter. She doesn't mean anything by it. That's just how she is. Susan turned to look out the window at the passing streetlights. And how are you, David? That night, lying in bed with Susan's steady breathing beside me, I stared at the ceiling and thought about all the times I'd made excuses, all the little betrayals disguised as keeping the peace. The way I'd let my mother's backhanded compliments go unchallenged, how I'd laughed along when she teased Susan about her cooking or her clothes or her job. The worst part? Somewhere along the way, I'd started believing it too. Started seeing my wife through my mother's critical eyes. That vibrant, funny woman who'd once made me feel like the luckiest man alive had somehow become too sensitive in my mind. I reached for Susan's hand in the dark. She didn't pull away, but her fingers lay still in mine, not holding on, just allowing. The next morning, the sunlight through the curtains felt different. Still beautiful, but colder somehow. Susan made coffee like always, but she didn't hum. And when I went to kiss her cheek, she turned just enough that my lips grazed her hair instead. That was the day I realized love isn't just about the big moments. It's in all the small choices, too. The ones you make every day, over and over, until one day you look up and realize, too late, which choices you should have made differently. The perfect start doesn't mean much if you don't protect what comes after. The phone calls started small. Just checking in, Mom would say, her voice honey-sweet. Then, like clockwork, the questions came. Did Susan really forget your father's birthday again? She hadn't. The card was in the mail. Is she always this messy, or just when I visit? The laundry basket had been overflowing one time. At first, I laughed it off. That's just Mom being Mom, I told Susan when she caught me frowning after one of those calls. Susan wiped her hands on a dish towel, her mouth tight. Does she call when you're at work to talk about me too? I should have heard the hurt in her voice. Instead, I shrugged. She's lonely since Dad passed. The kitchen grew quiet except for the tap dripping. That leak I kept meaning to fix. Susan stared at the sink like it held answers. She has bridge club on Tuesdays, book club on Fridays, and church every Sunday. She's not lonely, David. She's calculating. I bristled. Don't talk about my mother like that. Susan exhaled long and slow, the way she did when choosing words carefully. Then talk to her, please, before this goes too far. But I didn't. Instead, I started noticing things. The way Susan sighed when my mother's name popped up on my phone. How she'd leave the room when I took those calls, her shoulders hunched like she was bracing for impact. One evening, Mom called while Susan was out. That girl doesn't appreciate you, she murmured. Leaving you alone to eat frozen pizza again? Susan was at a teacher conference. She'd left homemade lasagna in the fridge. I opened my mouth to defend her and heard myself say, yeah, well, you know how she gets. The moment the words left my lips, I tasted bile. Who was this man agreeing behind his wife's back? That night, I watched Susan grade papers at the kitchen table, her reading glasses slipping down her nose. The woman who'd once laughed with me under summer stars now flinched when I touched her shoulder. The truth settled like a stone in my gut. The whispers weren't just in my ear anymore. They were in our home, in our bed, in the space between us where love used to live. And the terrible part? I'd handed her the shovel. I remember the exact moment I heard it, that first terrible fracture in what I thought was unbreakable. It was a Thursday evening, ordinary in every way except the way Susan stood at the kitchen window, her back to me, shoulders rigid with quiet hurt. Mom's coming for dinner Sunday, I announced, tossing the mail on the counter. Susan didn't turn around. Again? Her voice was calm, but her fingers whitened around the curtain she was adjusting. I felt that familiar prickle of irritation. She's family. Finally, she faced me, and what I saw in her eyes stopped me cold. Not anger, but exhaustion. The kind that comes from years of small wounds. I know she's family, David, but when do we get to be family? Something inside me twisted. What's that supposed to mean? She exhaled slowly, like she'd practiced this moment. It means every holiday, every birthday, every decision. It's always what your mother wants. I feel like a guest in my own marriage. The words landed like a blow. That's not fair, I snapped. After everything Mom's done for us, for you, Susan corrected softly. Not for us, never for me. Silence filled the kitchen, thick and suffocating. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a dog barked in the distance. Normal sounds in a moment that felt anything but normal. I wanted to argue, to list all the ways she was wrong. But then I saw it. The framed photo on the counter from our wedding day. Susan's radiant smile, my arm around her waist. My mother's stiff posture just at the edge of the frame. How had I never noticed that before? When I looked up, Susan was watching me, tears glistening but not falling. I miss us, she whispered. That's when I felt it. The first real crack in the foundation of everything we'd built. Not from some dramatic betrayal, but from 1,000 tiny surrenders I'd made without even realizing. Surrenders to my mother's expectations. Surrenders of my wife's happiness. The terrible truth settled over me. I hadn't just allowed this divide. I'd helped create it. And suddenly, I wasn't sure if the crack was in our marriage or in me. The night it all came crashing down started like any other. I came home to find Susan sitting at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cold cup of tea. The microwave clock read 8:47. I was late again. Mom needed help moving some furniture, I said before she could ask. Susan didn't look up. Her text said you left work at 4. Something hot and defensive rose in my chest. You're checking my messages now? Finally, she met my eyes, and what I saw there made my breath catch. Not anger, but resignation. No, David, your mother forwarded them to me, with a note about how unreliable you've become since we got married. The air left the room. All those private conversations, all those complaints I'd made in confidence laid bare. The words died in my throat. Susan stood slowly, her chair scraping against the tile. Do you know what I did today? I canceled my sister's visit. Again, because your mother said hosting family during her bridge tournament week would be inconsiderate. Her voice broke. My sister, who just finished chemo. The shame hit me like a physical blow. Susan, I didn't... Stop. She held up a trembling hand. Just stop. I can't do this anymore. I can't keep coming in second to a woman who looks at our marriage like it's some sort of competition she has to win. The truth of her words settled between us, heavy and undeniable. All those years of harmless comments, all the times I dismissed Susan's feelings as oversensitivity, they came rushing back in a damning flood. I reached for her. Let's fix this. Susan stepped back, her wedding ring catching the light as she wiped her cheeks. You've been fixing things your mother's way for 10 years, David. Where's that gotten us? The silence that followed was deafening. Somewhere outside, a car door slammed. A dog barked. Normal life continuing while ours unraveled. I'll call her, I said desperately. I'll tell her... Tell her what? Susan laughed, a broken sound. That we're finally setting boundaries? She'll cry. You'll apologize. And next week we'll be right back here. She slid the ring off her finger and set it on the table with a quiet click. I can't keep loving you while you love her more. The finality in her voice terrified me. This wasn't an argument. It was a eulogy for something I'd been too blind to protect. As I watched her walk down the hallway, suitcase already packed, the devastating truth hit me. This wasn't my mother's doing. Not really. Every time I'd chosen peace over principle, every apology I demanded from Susan instead of my mom, every "she didn't mean it that way" I'd uttered, those were my choices, my failures. The front door closed with a softness that shattered me. In the sudden stillness, I stared at our wedding photo on the wall. Two smiling people who couldn't see the cracks forming beneath their feet. And I realized too late, some breaks can't be fixed, only mourned. The first morning alone in my house, I found Susan's coffee mug still sitting in the dishwasher, the chipped one with the sunflower design she'd bought at a flea market years ago. I took it out carefully, as if it might dissolve in my hands, and stared at the faint lipstick stain on the rim. That's when the shaking started. My sister Linda found me like that 2 hours later, still clutching the mug at the kitchen table. Jesus, David, she said, dropping her grocery bags. Her eyes swept over the unwashed dishes, the unmade bed visible through the bedroom door. Where's Susan? I couldn't say the word, so I just looked at the suitcase standing by the front door, the one Susan hadn't taken. Linda sank into the chair across from me. Mom? A bitter laugh escaped me. She left because I never chose her. Not really. Linda surprised me then. She didn't offer comfort. Instead, she reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. You need to see something. The screen showed a text thread with Mom from last Christmas. Don't let David bring Susan tomorrow. Tell him I'm not feeling well. Below it, Linda's response. She's his wife, Mom. Then Mom's reply, not for long if you help me. The world tilted. When was this? Right before you canceled your anniversary trip because Mom needed you, Linda said quietly. She scrolled further. This goes back years, David. The emergencies when you had plans. The gifts meant to point out Susan's flaws. She's been orchestrating this since your wedding day. I remembered suddenly, painfully, how Susan had begged me to go to marriage counseling last year, how I'd refused because Mom said therapy was for weak people. Linda took the mug from my frozen hands. You know why I divorced Mark? Because I finally realized Mom was treating him exactly like she treats Susan. She met my eyes, and I let her. The truth hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't about a mother's love. This was about control, and my complicity in it. I drove to Mom's that afternoon, my hands steady for the first time in weeks. She opened the door with a smile that faltered when she saw my face. David, Did you text Susan pretending to be me last month? I demanded. Tell her I wanted separate bank accounts? Mom's hand fluttered to her chest. I was just looking out for you. That girl never. That woman, I corrected, my voice shaking with rage and grief, was the love of my life. And you broke us. For once, Mom had nothing to say. I turned to leave, but not before seeing it, the flicker of satisfaction in her eyes. Because even now, she'd won. She'd gotten exactly what she wanted. The real awakening came later, staring at Susan's empty closet. It wasn't just that I'd lost her. It was that I'd handed her the scissors to cut herself out of my life, one dutiful son's compromise at a time. And the cruelest truth? The mother I'd spent my life trying to please would never love me the way the woman I'd driven away always had. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday. I sat at our old kitchen table, now just my table, staring at Susan's precise signature on the last page. The finality of it made my hands go numb. I drove to her apartment unannounced, something I'd never had the courage to do during our marriage. When she opened the door, her eyes widened briefly before settling into careful neutrality. She wore the sweater I'd bought her last Christmas, the blue one Mom had called unflattering. David, not angry, not welcoming, just tired. I got the papers, I said, my voice cracking like a teenager's. Susan nodded, holding the door open just wide enough to talk, but not enough to invite me in. The space behind her looked warm and lived in, with fresh flowers on the counter, something she'd always loved but never bought because Mom said they were a waste of money. I can't sign them, I blurted out. For the first time in years, Susan looked at me with something like pity. It's too late for that. Just tell me what to do. I'll fix it. You can't fix what you still don't understand, she said softly. Then, after a pause that felt like judgment, have you talked to your mother? The question surprised me. After what she did? Of course not. Susan's lips pressed into a thin line. That's the problem, David. You think this is about something she did, not about what you allowed. The truth of her words landed like a punch. I'd spent weeks raging at my mother's manipulations, but never once examined my own role, the 1,000 times I'd chosen the easy path over the right one. I was weak, I admitted, the words tasting like ash. Susan shook her head. Number you were loyal to the wrong person. She touched her bare ring finger absently. I used to wonder what would happen if you ever stood up to her. Now I know. You'd have become the man I married. A car honked somewhere downstairs. The scent of her perfume, the same one she'd worn our first date, drifted between us like a ghost. I miss you, I whispered. Susan smiled then, sad but certain. I know, but you miss who you were with me more. She closed the door gently, not a slam, not an argument, just an ending. Walking back to my car, I realized the cruelest truth. Susan had loved me enough to let me go, while my mother had only loved me enough to keep me small. The papers were signed by morning, not because I'd given up, but because for the first time I loved Susan enough to respect what she needed, even if it meant living without her. That was the reckoning, not with my mother, not with Susan, but with the man I'd allowed myself to become. The house was too quiet after the divorce. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. to the hum of the refrigerator and lie there, staring at the ceiling fan Susan had always complained squeaked too loudly. Now I missed that sound like a missing heartbeat. 6 months after the papers were signed, I ran into Susan at the grocery store. She was in the produce section, examining avocados with the same careful attention she'd once given to choosing our anniversary wine. When she looked up and saw me, neither of us pretended we hadn't noticed the other. David, she said, her voice steady. She wore a new haircut that sweated her, and a silver bracelet I didn't recognize. You look good, I managed to say, gripping my shopping cart like it was the only thing keeping me upright. The ordinary items in her basket, yogurt, fresh basil, the expensive coffee she loved but rarely bought for herself, felt like postcards from a life I'd been evicted from. She studied me for a long moment. You look tired. I almost laughed. The truth was I hadn't slept through the night since she left. Mom called last week, I heard myself say. She asked if I'd heard you were dating someone. Susan's expression didn't change. And what did you tell her? That it wasn't my business anymore. The words tasted bitter but true. Something in her face softened then. That's progress. We stood there between the lemons and limes, two strangers who'd once known each other's secrets, bodies, dreams. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A child screamed 3 aisles over. Normal life continuing around us while we hovered in this impossible space between past and present. I planted those peonies you liked, I said suddenly, in the backyard. Susan's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. They'll bloom next spring. Not our backyard, not we'll see. Just the simple truth, gently delivered. When we parted ways at the checkout, she touched my arm. Just briefly, just once. Take care of yourself, David. Back home, I sat at the kitchen table with my unbagged groceries, staring at the water stain Susan had always meant to fix. The house still smelled faintly of her vanilla hand soap, though I'd replaced it months ago. That night, for the first time, I called my mother and didn't apologize when she criticized my life choices. I didn't argue either, just listened, then said goodbye when I was ready. The next morning, I finally fixed the squeaky ceiling fan. Not because I thought Susan would come back, but because I was starting to understand. Some silences aren't meant to be endured, some are meant to be repaired. The aftermath wasn't what I expected. The world didn't end when she left. It just became different, quieter, more honest. And maybe, in time, that would be enough.